Hey rich girls, Kirby here. Is student loan debt going to be canceled once and for all? President Biden is promising to do just that. But will this time be any different? This is Rich Girl's Guide, where we demystify the world of personal finance to help you create a financially successful and fulfilling life. I'm your host, Kirby Delicano, and I worked in wealth management for over 6 years before leaving the office to focus on my business and my family. Yet again, we are hearing the same thing we have heard on and off throughout the past 4-ish years. Student loan debt might be forgiven. This time, President Biden is making the same promises, but using a slightly different method to get there. There's a law that was passed back in 1965 called the Higher Education Act, and a specific provision in this act has some vague verbiage surrounding the authority that the Education Secretary has in regards to waiving, paying, and/or enforcing elements of higher education. The vagueness of this specific provision of the act may actually give authority to the Education Secretary to make sweeping decisions regarding all things higher education. At least that is what lawmakers are trying to argue with this new proposal. The new proposal is targeted towards 4 types of borrowers. Borrowers that have been making payments for decades, think over 20 years. Borrowers that are currently facing financial hardship. Borrowers that attended low financial value programs. And borrowers that have large balances due to interest. This will apply to roughly 30 million Americans out of the 43 million that have federal student loans. If this proposal does pass, it will likely be rolled out in mid-2025. The Biden administration has made a bold claim that millions of Americans will have their loans forgiven prior to the November election, while opponents to the proposal say the Supreme Court will block this just as they did in 2022. Let's take a little stroll down memory lane, shall we? Back in 2019, student loan forgiveness sparked hope for many young Americans as one of President Biden's campaign promises. It wasn't until 2022 that a proposal was actually introduced that would eliminate student debt for nearly 40 million Americans. The issue was that this proposal was wrapped up in a pandemic-era emergency act. In other words, the way the administration went about passing this proposal was sketchy at best. Many people ask the question, is student loan forgiveness a national emergency? This backfired in 2023 when the Supreme Court ruled that the sitting administration had overstepped and the proposal was not a true emergency, effectively killing the proposal. Once the proposal was killed in June of last year, the sitting administration actually got to work on the current forgiveness program. So, will things be different this time? Since the previous proposal was essentially a misuse of an emergency act, this current proposal is different in a number of ways. First, the current proposal is one that is based in actual law, while the previous proposal relied on the pandemic and essentially finding a loophole that they could utilize. While I have no legal background or knowledge, it does seem that the experts who have spoken out so far do believe that this new proposal is more legally sound, but that is ultimately to be determined. Second, the administration took their time putting this proposal together. All of my research points to the 2022 proposal being rushed so that it could be pushed through as quickly as possible. Another difference might be how much onus is placed on the borrowers. With the 2022 proposal, there was going to be a sweeping elimination of a majority of federal student loan debt. Borrowers would not have to submit applications or go through any kind of application process. Essentially, if they met the right criteria, their debt would automatically be forgiven. With this new proposal, however, they are calling it a program, and as such, I'm assuming borrowers might need to actually submit financial statements or show some kind of verification or proof that they do meet the criteria in order to have their loans forgiven. If this is the case, that would mean it will take longer for borrowers to actually see their loans forgiven. And I really don't anticipate anything going through in time for the November election, like the current administration is claiming. Who will qualify for student loan forgiveness? Like I mentioned earlier, the new proposal is targeted towards 4 types of borrowers. First is borrowers that have been making payments for over 20 years, which makes up roughly 2.5 million borrowers. If an individual started making payments on a loan for an undergraduate degree before July 2005, or started making payments on a loan for a graduate degree before July 2000, then they may be eligible for forgiveness. As a side note, can you imagine paying off student loan debt for 20 plus years? That is an actual mortgage. I honestly can't wrap my head around that. Next are borrowers that have large balances due to interest, and this makes up the majority of those who may qualify, nearly 25 million Americans. Imagine making your monthly payments month over month, year over year, just to see your total remaining loan amount increase instead of decrease. Unfortunately, a lot of borrowers are experiencing just that. The interest can get out of hand quickly with compound interest, especially when you are making small payments. While I do believe there is a certain amount of responsibility the borrower has to own up to, I personally think that it is abhorrent for the federal government to be charging crazy interest on these kinds of student loans. This is not a credit card company. The borrower wasn't using the cash to go on a bender in Vegas. They were promised a better financial future for themselves and for their future families if they took out these loans and worked hard for their degree. And after, they were rewarded by watching an ever-increasing student loan tab despite making their monthly required payments. Next are borrowers that are facing financial hardship. Now, this is pretty ambiguous, and I'm hoping they will provide more clarity in the coming months. But essentially, if a borrower is likely to default on their loan and they have a low income, they may be eligible for forgiveness. Last but not least, we have borrowers that attended low financial value programs. Now, at first glance, I thought this was kind of odd, but I did some digging and there were some sketchy schools out there that were seemingly predatory towards young, low-income individuals. Some of these institutions have actually been shut down in recent years, and essentially these schools would promise these hopeful young individuals a shiny college degree. All they would have to do is get a government loan. And then once they graduated, they'd be making so much money that they would be able to pay it off in no time. Well, that did not end up being the case for a lot of Americans. Instead, many of these programs identified by this new proposal have actually had their ability to participate in the federal student aid program taken away. I think this is an extreme example of what my generation, millennials, have kind of been bringing up over the past few years. We were sold this American dream that as long as we got good grades in high school, did our extracurriculars, and went to a good college, we would graduate with a great paying job, be able to buy a house, raise our family, and essentially live happily ever after. Instead, I got to watch in high school as college graduates in 2008 and 2009 could not find jobs to save their life. They were in crippling student loan debt that meant there was no extra cash to buy real estate with. And once they finally did get a job and were able to settle down, surprise, home prices have skyrocketed and your student loan debt is increasing day over day. All right, I went on a little bit of a rant there, but honestly, in doing the research for this episode and knowing a lot of people who have thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of student loan debt really got to me. I find it hard to sympathize with grown adults who make poor financial decisions time over time and point the blame in any direction aside from their own. But to me, this is different. These were young kids fresh out of high school, being pressured by parents and society and institutions to take out huge amounts of debt without giving them any support to pay it off after they received their piece of paper. And my heart goes out to them. I was fortunate enough to have school paid for by my family, but I often wonder what I would have done if I had to pay for school myself. Would I have gone and taken out insane loans? Or would I have said it and gone straight into the workforce, never getting a degree at all? Those both seem like pretty shitty options, and I honestly don't know what the correct answer would have been. So, what does this mean for borrowers? Well, for now, not too much. Again, we have conflicting statements from officials saying some debt could be forgiven as early as this fall or next summer, or never if the proposal gets shot down again. Without giving an actual recommendation, I will instead tell you what I would do if I had student loans that qualified for this forgiveness. I would pay whatever minimum monthly amount I had to pay to not go into default and not a penny more. If there was even a slight chance that a significant amount of debt could be wiped away, personally, I would be willing to take that risk and keep my fingers crossed that it would get eliminated. If I had extra income that I had previously been putting towards that loan month over month, I think I would instead open a high yield savings account, such as an online bank like Ally Bank, sock away that extra cash month over month, and start to reap the 4.25% annual interest in that savings account. That way, I know I have cash on the side ready to put towards the student loans if the proposal does in fact fall through. And I've been earning some extra interest that will help offset the student loan interest at least a little bit. Best case scenario, if the proposal does go through and my loans are forgiven, I will now have a nice little pot of money that I can put towards my emergency savings, a home down payment, or even towards my retirement. All right, I want to know your thoughts on this new proposal. Do you think it will get approved? Do you have any loans that will be forgiven? Let me know your thoughts in the comments or send me an anonymous message through the link in my description. Thank you so much for listening today. I will catch you on the next episode. Till then, have a great day. Later, rich girls.